My name is Allison Monroe. I'm 33 years old and I work in real estate investment in Chicago. For many years, I believed that my quiet sacrifices would one day be acknowledged, even just with a heartfelt thank you from someone in the family. But on that Sunday night, everything I had trusted in shattered in less than a minute. I had just wrapped up a negotiation meeting with a group of investors when my phone buzzed. It was Casey, my cousin. The message was just one short sentence. Allison, you have to see this. Right now. Attached was a live stream link. I sat frozen in my Denver hotel room, where I was on a business trip, as the video loaded. There was my mother, Carol Monroe, sitting at the dining table, wine glass in hand, her expression calm, voice sharp and rehearsed. Allison is nothing but a burden. A failure in a cheap suit pretending she's made something of herself. Everyone at the table burst out laughing. Casey whispered from behind the camera. She doesn't know I'm streaming. Have you ever spent your youth giving everything for someone who couldn't even offer you a shred of respect? If you've ever been in that situation, leave a comment below just so I know I'm not alone. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story stirred something in you. Because after that night, I never went home again. And the real story began at that very moment. I sat there on the 16th floor of that hotel, under the soft yellow glow of a bedside lamp, staring at my phone as if it had transformed into something foreign. My mother's words echoed in my mind, not just as sound, but as a sharp cut etched deep into memory. I'd heard harsh words from her before, but never like this, not in public. No hesitation, no remorse, no awareness that her only daughter was out there somewhere, quietly giving up years of her life just so she could keep drinking wine with her friends. I had always thought I was strong, that I could endure the cold glances, the passive-aggressive comments about how I was never quite like the other kids. But hearing her laugh, mocking the work I had poured my sweat into building, made me realize something. What I was living wasn't strength. It was blind endurance. My childhood was filled with silence. My father died in a car crash when I was 13. That day, my mother collapsed on the kitchen floor, face buried in her hands. She didn't cry aloud, she just breathed heavily, like someone drowning. I stood in the doorway, clutching my school bag, too scared to walk in. From that moment on, she changed. No more tenderness, no more soft reminders to go to bed or check on my homework. Instead, she began to control everything. My time, my clothes, my friends, my dreams, even things I hadn't had the chance to say out loud. I applied to college as a psychology major without her permission. I sent in the application in secret, did the interview in secret, and even hid the acceptance letter. It wasn't until the day I moved into the dorm that I finally told her. Psychology? Who do you think that's going to support? She snapped, folding the letter without reading past the major. But I went anyway, carrying a scholarship and a single suitcase. Those years in college were the first time I truly lived as myself. I loved helping people, listening, connecting, trying to understand what hid behind the masks we all wear. I wasn't the best in class, but I worked harder than anyone. I dreamed of one day opening a community counseling center where those who had been through trauma could find their voice again. Then my mother fell ill. The stroke left her partially paralyzed and in need of long-term therapy. I dropped out during my final year, emptied my student savings, and returned to Indiana. "It's about time," she said as I wheeled her out of the hospital. "Better to do something real than keep chasing some foolish dream." I said nothing. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, holding an old photo of my father, and cried, not for the degree I left behind, but for the crushing loneliness of giving everything and still being invisible. I looked for jobs that offered flexibility as long as I could earn enough to take care of her. Real estate wasn't something I ever planned to enter, but once I did, I quickly found my rhythm. Homebuyers didn't just need land and paperwork. They needed someone to hear them about the future, the financial anxiety, the children who would grow up between those walls. I once helped a young couple find their first apartment after 3 years in a shared rental. The husband shook my hand so firmly, his eyes wet with emotion. "Thank you," he said. "I didn't think we'd ever get out of that situation." That moment reassured me I had chosen the right path. I worked hard, built my reputation, and carved out a place in a fiercely competitive market. But to my mother, none of it mattered. "It's just selling houses," she'd say whenever I came home late, exhausted. "If you had stayed in school, maybe you'd have your own clinic by now." She always said if, like everything I'd built was some kind of mistake, something off course, needing correction. I never told her that it was her illness that forced me off my dream path. I didn't blame her, but I couldn't erase the sting of hearing her dismiss me over and over. Once I invited her to see one of the homes I'd just helped close. A bright, well-designed condo with an elevator and a quiet courtyard perfect for the elderly couple who moved in. She stepped in, glanced around, and shrugged. "It's okay. If your father were still alive, he'd have built me something 3 times the size." I turned away quickly so she wouldn't see my eyes welling up. For 5 years, I shouldered all of her expenses: medical, therapy, insurance. From every commission check, I set aside money for the next hospital bill. On every work trip, I called Casey to make sure someone was checking her meds, the water bill, her appointment calendar. No one knew I sold my first car, the one I'd saved for all through college, just to cover last year's nursing facility fee. I never talked about it, because I believed when you give from the heart, you don't need to boast. What I never expected was that all of it in my mother's eyes was just me pretending to be successful. I couldn't believe it. That she saw me as a woman in a cheap blazer, playing dress-up with adulthood. I looked back at the screen and saw her pouring more wine, chatting and laughing with Aunt Martha, Uncle Gerald, even the same relatives I had quietly sent money to when my mom's bills were overdue. They all sat there, nodding along, chuckling, like I was the punchline to some Sunday night joke. I turned off the video, my hand trembling. Another message from Casey popped up. I didn't know she'd to say that. "If you want me to delete the video, I will." I stared at the screen before typing, "No, leave it. I'm coming home tomorrow." I opened my suitcase and began to pack. The business trip wasn't finished, but something else mattered more. None of them knew I was the legal owner of the house my mother lived in. And none of them knew I had kept every receipt, every payment, every prescription, every insurance document neatly organized in a brown folder, tucked into a drawer back at my apartment. I zipped up my suitcase, my mind still fogged like I was walking through smoke. Not because I hadn't been hurt before, but because I wasn't willing to be hurt again. It was already dark by the time I reached the old town. Familiar streets unfolded under a soft amber glow, quiet and unchanged, as if they'd never witnessed anything painful. I didn't call ahead. No one knew I was coming, and I intended to keep it that way. The car pulled up to the red brick house I'd called home for over 30 years. The living room light was still on. The same faded curtains from my high school years hung in the window. I sat there a moment longer, gripping the steering wheel like I needed more courage to walk into a place that no longer felt mine. I went around to the back door. Casey had texted me earlier. The kitchen door would be left unlocked, like always when I returned late. I turned the knob gently. Even the soft creak of the hinge startled me. No one inside heard a thing. I stepped in, passed through the hallway, and headed straight for my old bedroom. It was still painted pale gray, the low bookshelf by the window, my father's picture on the desk. No one had touched a thing since I'd left. I sat on the bed, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. The files I'd carefully compiled over the past 5 years popped up. Medications, physical therapy costs, Carol's insurance, care facility payments. I had kept it, all not to claim credit, but to manage things properly. I never thought there'd come a day I'd need these numbers to defend myself. There was a light knock at the door. "It's me, Casey," her small voice said, almost as if she was afraid I'd refuse. I opened the door, and Casey stepped in, holding 2 cups of hot tea. Her eyes were red. "You came back so fast, I didn't think you'd really come." I took the cup. I couldn't just sit still after what happened. Casey sat down on the chair by the desk, turning the silver ring on her finger. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stream those words. I thought live streaming our family dinners would be fun, some lighthearted content. But when she said that, I didn't know what else to do." I looked at my cousin for a long time. Casey was only 19, far too young to understand the full weight of human complexity. I didn't blame her. In fact, I felt grateful. I'm glad you didn't turn it off. What I need isn't an apology. I need the truth. Casey pulled her phone from the pocket of her hoodie and opened the screen recording app. I saved the original video. If you need to, do anything with it. I nodded. Keep it. I'm not sure if I'll use it, but it's evidence. Are you planning to talk to her? I stayed silent, pressing my hand to the rim of the teacup. The heat warmed my palms, but it couldn't melt the cold lodged in my chest. I won't argue. I won't cry. I won't list what I've done. But I need to step out of this. Completely. Step out? Casey hesitated. You mean, stop all support? Not just the money, I said slowly. The responsibility, the wounds, the illusions I've carried too long. Mom chose to see me that way, so I'll let her live with that choice. But from now on, she won't be my burden. Casey lowered her head. I think I understand. I smiled faintly, setting the cup down. I don't want you dragged into this. You've already given me the one thing I needed most: clarity. That's more than enough. Casey clenched her hands together, then stood up. I'm still here if you need me. After all, you were the first one to teach me how to drive. I haven't forgotten. I gave a small nod. When Casey left the room, I stood, pulled the folder from my suitcase, and began sorting through the documents. I organized every expense by year, every payment slip, every email exchange with doctors and insurance companies. There were words I'd forgotten I had ever written, like, I confirm I will cover this payment for patient Carol Monroe, no reimbursement required. Or, I accept the increased fee for the new medication. Please do not delay treatment. Reading those lines again, I didn't feel proud. I felt empty. Every signature, every bank transfer, every dream I had put on hold, all of it, and still not one word of acknowledgement from the woman I called my. I pulled out a stack of important papers, the deed to the house. The house my mother lived in was still under my name, because I was the one who had paid off the final loan after she went bankrupt 6 years ago. I had once thought I'd transfer it back to her name later, when things were more stable. I turned to the contract. The conditional transfer clause was still in effect. If the owner wanted to reclaim the house to sell or rent, all it required was 30 days' notice. I'd never thought I would use that clause, but now I began to consider it. On the desk, my father's framed photo glowed softly in the lamplight, his gentle face, his eyes still watching me from somewhere far away. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead into my hand, feeling a heavy wave rise inside me and then slowly recede. It was time to return to my mother, the entire life she wanted to control. I would only keep the part that belonged to me. My phone buzzed. An email had arrived from the insurance office. I had requested they send the full history of payments, and they had responded faster than I expected. I opened it, downloaded the attached file, and placed it into the folder labeled Closure. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m., completing every step of the financial separation. I submitted requests to remove my name from joint accounts, canceled my guarantor status on insurance policies, and updated contact information with her primary physician. Each action was deliberate, careful, as though I were unlocking one link after another from an invisible chain that had bound me for years. When everything was finished, I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and stared out through the half-open window. The night wind from the distant fields blew in, cold and clean. I didn't know how my mother would react once she received notices from all the agencies, but I knew one thing for sure. I had prepared every step so there would be no turning back halfway. I felt no regret. Not anymore. I woke late the next morning. Not from exhaustion, but because my mind was still wrapped around the documents I'd pored over all night. Soft light seeped through the window, spilling across the stained white ceiling of the old room. Everything was just as it had been when I left 3 years ago, the wooden wardrobe with its squeaky hinges, the alarm clock long frozen in place, the stack of books left in the corner as if waiting for someone to pick them up again. I got up, put on a coat, and went downstairs. Casey had already left early, leaving a note on the kitchen table. "I'm at a friend's. Call if you need me." Next to it was a slice of toast and a thermos of warm coffee. I smiled faintly. She didn't say much, but she always had her own way of making sure no one felt abandoned. I ate quickly, then opened my computer. The Excel sheet lit up, filled with row after row of numbers, the final total sitting at over $132,400, spread across the years since 2018. Medications, physical therapy fees, insurance premiums, even emergency payments when my mother was hospitalized twice in 2020. I remembered one month when I had to borrow against the company credit card just to make the payment on time. One line made me pause longer. Ford Fiesta sale, 2019, $6,200. My very first car, bought with the commission from the first house I sold. It wasn't fancy, but I cherished it. I had driven through endless suburbs searching for clients, braved pouring rain on late nights after failed open houses. I sold it in a rush to cover the bill for my mother's cardiac rehab after a drug complication. She never asked what happened to that car. She only said, "You're young. Walking will be good for your health." I scrolled further down to the section about the old apartment in West Chicago. On paper, it was still under my mother's name. She had originally bought it when my father was alive, but after her stroke, she couldn't keep up the payments and considered selling it. I offered to keep it, to take over the remaining debt. The bank agreed because I had steady income. Every transaction was handled by me, the monthly payments drawn directly from my personal account. My mother had promised that once I paid it off, she'd transfer the deed back to me as a thank you. I believed her. Last year, I called my lawyer to double-check the paperwork. He sent me the updated deed, and I nearly stopped breathing when I saw the name, Jessica Monroe. Not me, not my mother. Jessica, the daughter of a distant cousin, the girl who had gone to high school with me, the one my mother always praised. "She's such a good girl, studying law. So polite, unlike you." Jessica had never contributed a cent, yet her name was on the deed to the apartment I had poured years of money into. I didn't ask. I didn't want another argument, not when I already knew how it would end. But from that moment, something inside me broke away from my mother, as if every last thread of connection had quietly unraveled. I printed copies of all the documents and placed them into a new folder. I labeled it Proof. That afternoon, I went to the local bank where I had once opened a joint account with my mother to handle some of her long-term care expenses. The teller behind the counter looked older than the last time I'd seen her, but she still recognized me. "Allison? Oh, what a surprise to see you here." I nodded, offering a faint smile. "I need to close the joint account with my mother and remove all payment authorizations." She looked at me for a moment, then slid her chair closer to her computer. "That account's been used mostly for medical expenses. Are you sure you want to close it?" "I'm sure," I answered without a moment's hesitation. After a few minutes of printing papers, signing, confirmations, and updating the system, she handed me an official notice. "From today, you are no longer liable for any transactions." I held the paper in my hands, and the relief didn't come the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like dropping a weight. It felt like pulling out a knife that had been lodged in my chest so long I thought it was part of me. Leaving the bank, I drove toward the apartment in Chicago that no longer belonged to me. I stopped at the corner across the street, once as familiar as a backyard. The building was the same. Brown shingles, a small balcony with a few lavender pots. I used to sit on that balcony for hours, after long days of work, sipping cheap wine and reading psychology textbooks. I opened my phone and scrolled to old photos. One showed the view from that balcony, a pale purple sunset over the row of houses, the streetlights casting a glow on a thin white curtain. I had once thought, no matter how chaotic the world feels, here, I have a pocket of peace. Looking at it now, there was nothing but emptiness. I didn't go in. I didn't call Jessica to ask why. I just sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, reminding myself that even if everything I once owned was gone, there was still one thing I had never lost: my ability to start over. I started the engine and turned back toward downtown. There, the notary office was waiting for me to complete the paperwork revoking medical power of attorney for my mother. I had prepared every line, every step. There would be no loophole for her to use my name to request services or drain more funds. On the way, I stopped at a small roadside bookstore. Walking in, I inhaled the scent of new paper and ink, soft like a sedative. I bought a notebook and a black fountain pen, not for anything grand, but simply to record each step I had taken to pull myself out of the wreckage called family duty. On the first page, I wrote, "I have loved, I have sacrificed, I have been forgotten. But starting today, I remember myself." That afternoon, I sat alone in the small rental apartment in Chicago, beside a stack of printed documents and a cup of cold tea. I opened my personal email, created a new message with a simple subject line, "Notice of ending support obligations." I selected every address from the family list, the same people who had leaned on my silent sacrifices for years, without once asking how I managed. Some had asked me to cover my mother's medications. Others had left me alone on hospital shifts and disappeared when it was their turn. None ever asked how I was coping. They just assumed I was financially stable, single with extra time, close to mom, so it was only natural. I attached a detailed spreadsheet of every expense I had covered over the past 5 years. A long list of numbers without emotion, but proof of the sleepless nights, the decisions I put aside, the opportunities I let slip away. At the end of the email, I wrote, clearly, "From today, I am no longer responsible for any financial or medical obligations related to Carol Monroe. If any family member wishes to support her, I will provide all relevant records. I do not expect agreement, nor ask for sympathy. I only need everyone to know the truth and to leave me in peace." I pressed send. Not long after, the first message came from Aunt Gloria, my mother's sister. Short but clear. "Allison, you're just overwhelmed emotionally. Families don't cut ties over small misunderstandings. Your mother needs you." An hour later, Uncle Paul called. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail. "Your mom is sick, no one can replace you. No matter what happened, you're still her daughter." My cousin Ryan's text was harsher. "You're acting like a stranger. No one in this family abandons their own when they need help." I stayed silent. No replies, no reactions. Only 2 people reached out, and not to scold me. Casey called first. "I read your letter." Her voice small but steady. "You did the right thing. I saw every number you listed. Even that one where your mom bought a new fridge with your money last year but told everyone it was from Aunt Gloria." I laughed, short and bitter. I'd forgotten about that one. You don't have to explain yourself to anyone. Those who don't want to understand never will, but I believe you. Then came Uncle Walter, my father's youngest brother. He called that evening, his voice calm and steady as always. "Are you holding up, Allison?" "I'm better now after sending that email. I read it all. I can see the effort you've poured in." I stayed quiet, overwhelmed. "If your father were still alive, he never would have let you carry all that alone," he said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I leaned back in the chair, gripping the phone. "I don't blame anyone. It's just gone on too long." Uncle Walter sighed. "Do you need anything? Legal help, an advisor, or just someone to talk to?" "Having you call like this is more than enough." We didn't say much more, but that call was an anchor in the storm. At least, I wasn't completely alone. The next 3 days, I focused on finishing all the remaining paperwork. The law office processed the transfer of medical representation, the insurance company confirmed my guarantor status was revoked, and the bank account once used for my mother's bills was formally closed. I requested official notices of these changes be mailed directly to her. By Friday afternoon, I received confirmation from the courier service. All documents had been delivered to my mother's address, signed for. I didn't need to guess her reaction. The flood of voicemails on my phone said it all. "What are you thinking, Allison? I can't believe you'd do this to me." I had a doctor's appointment this morning and the card was declined. Fix it now. Don't. Act like I never raised you. How could you turn your back on me like this? I deleted each message, saving none. That night, I opened my notebook again. On the last page, I added one more line. I once tried to be the perfect daughter, but today, I choose to be true to myself. I closed the notebook, stood, and stepped onto the balcony. Outside, the city murmured under the amber streetlights. Life went on, no one at the center, no savior, no debts owed. Tomorrow, I would schedule a meeting with an academic advisor to ask about my unfinished master's program. I still remembered the feeling of a quiet classroom, of turning in a paper written with my whole heart. Maybe it was time to return, but this time, for me, not to please anyone else. I don't know why I woke so early that morning. The sky was still dim, the air outside the window cold enough that condensation clung to the glass. The city below hadn't yet stirred, but inside me was a storm that had rumbled long enough, cut that had never healed. I brewed some coffee, sat down at my desk, and was about to review my schedule with the academic advisor when the phone rang. The screen showed a name, Elliot Granger. Elliot was an old classmate from my graduate program in psychology. Later, he shifted into law, and now he's one of the best real estate attorneys I've ever known. I had referred many clients to him for property transactions, and in return, he had helped me sort out legal issues more than once, never asking for anything back. Hi, Allison. Elliot's voice was still deep and steady as always. I sent you an email last night. Did you see it? Sorry. I turned off notifications yesterday. I spoke while opening my inbox. One subject line stood out, regarding apartment 42B, West Chicago. Elliot continued. I checked the property registry like you asked. That apartment has just been transferred. I stopped breathing for a moment. Transferred to who? Jessica Monroe. The transfer was signed and filed 6 months ago. Fully legal, notarized, and electronically certified. I stared at the screen. Elliot had attached a copy of the ownership transfer. Jessica's name printed clearly on the line, new owner. No mention of me, no conditions. You said 6 months ago? My voice was low. Yes, March. At that time, the deed was still under Carol, but she signed an unconditional transfer. I don't know the family details, but every procedure was proper. I went still. March. That was when I was buried in 2 major real estate contracts. Also when I advanced money to cover hospital bills because my mother hadn't renewed her insurance yet. That apartment had been my backup plan to sell later and fund a scholarship for medical students, as a way of continuing the path I once left behind. I'm sorry, Allison. Elliot spoke slowly. If you need further legal guidance, I'm here. Thank you. But you don't need to feel guilty. You're just the messenger. After hanging up, I sat frozen. Not angry, not sad, just empty. I opened the old financial plan I had drafted. The first line still clear. Plan to sell West Chicago apartment in 2 years. Allocate 50% to a scholarship fund for medical students with financial hardship. I remembered every line I wrote, every reason I had to hold on to that apartment. And now, it was gone. I stepped onto the balcony, taking a deep breath. A strange silence wrapped around me. Not the silence of pain, but of confirmation that I had reached the edge, and there was no turning back. That afternoon, I went to Elliot's law office. I didn't call ahead. When I walked in, he was mid-signature but looked up and motioned for me to sit. I want to discuss the house in Indiana, I said directly. Your mother's house? Elliot asked, already knowing. Yes, it's in her name, but there's still the 2017 contract I signed on her behalf. It states, if the owner fails to maintain financial capability or neglects maintenance costs for 6 consecutive months, ownership can be reclaimed by the original guarantor me. I remember that. It's valid. And from the records I checked this morning, the property tax has 3 unpaid cycles, nearly $8,000 in total, plus unpaid utility bills for electricity and water. Then, I straightened, meeting his eyes. I'll reclaim it, do the paperwork. As soon as possible. Elliot set his pen down for a moment. Are you ready for this? More ready than at any other point in my life. He nodded. I'll arrange it. But Allison, once you begin, there's no going back. If she resists, even publicly, will you stay firm? I didn't hesitate. I've stayed silent long enough. It's time to end it. 3 days later, I received the notary appointment. Elliot included the reclamation contract and the official legal notice addressed to my mother. The document was airtight, fully compliant with state law. I printed, signed, and mailed it back to his office by express delivery. At the same time, I drafted another email, this one only to Jessica. I didn't need noise. Just one line. I hope you use the apartment you now own in a way that matches the price I paid. Live well. No blame. No reminders of the past. But I knew Jessica would understand every word. Before bed, I opened my notebook and wrote on the next page. Some people will never admit what they've taken, but that doesn't mean I'll let them keep it forever. On the desk, the lawyer's notice lay untouched. I hadn't sent it to my mother yet. I thought, perhaps she already suspected. But what I was doing wasn't to hurt her, it was to stop hurting myself. I wrote the letter by hand on a drizzling morning. Dim light filtered through the thin curtain, silence filling the childhood room. The pen moved slowly across the page, every stroke steady, as calm as the decision itself. This is not abandonment. This is survival. Don't look for me. I wrote nothing else. No explanations, no pleas, no promises to return. I folded it into thirds and placed it in the small drawer where she kept utility bills, next to old blue notebooks, a place she was certain to find it. An hour later, I left the house quietly. No suitcase. No one to see me off. Just a small bag with my enrollment papers, the lease for Denver, and the notebook I still wrote in each day. I boarded the 8:30 a.m. flight, a window seat. The plane lifted through gray clouds. I didn't look back. I didn't think too much. What needed closing, I had closed with silence. When the plane landed, Denver's sky was astonishingly clear. The dry air carried none of Chicago's heavy dampness. I stepped down the ramp, a lightness spreading from my chest to my feet, as if I was setting foot on ground that truly belonged to me. I rented a small apartment near campus. Not luxurious, but tidy and full of light. The landlords, the Landons, were a kind, elderly couple. They lived downstairs, often watering their garden in the evenings, asking about my classes, bringing me homemade cookies. I changed my phone number the day after I moved in. Every old contact was deleted or hidden. I left the family chat groups, blocked all social media accounts linked to my mother or relatives. No announcements. No expectations, no permission needed. The first days were empty, yes. Walking home after class along leaf-strewn paths, I couldn't help thinking of Casey or Uncle Walter. But then I reminded myself, not everyone loses as I did, but everyone has the right to begin again. I went to the student services office to finalize my re-enrollment. The advisor was Professor Diane Millen, her hair already silver, her voice soft as a breeze. She reviewed my old transcripts, then looked up with a smile. You were an excellent student. The school is very glad to have you back. I bowed my head slightly, thanked her, but said nothing more. Compliments no longer made me shy, nor did they make me elated. They were simply confirmation that I hadn't missed the chance for too long. Classes stretched from early morning until late afternoon. I studied with younger students, most fresh out of college. Many were curious because I was the only one over 30 in the class, but no one pried too deeply. They assumed I had changed careers. I didn't correct them. Not because I was hiding my past, but because I had left it behind. In the evenings, I spent time doing assignments, reading extra materials, and writing in my notebook. I built habits, walking every morning, no phone use after 10 p.m., and replanting small pots of greenery for the windowsill. Each action was intentional, as if I were learning to care for myself, the one thing I had never done properly. One morning, I was invited to a special orientation for students returning after an academic break. About 20 of us gathered in a small hall, most of them middle-aged women, some with graying hair. They shared why they were back: a nurse hoping to retrain, a woman who had paused school to care for her sick husband, someone who had battled addiction and now wanted to counsel others like her. I sat quietly in the back row, listening to each story as though hearing fragments of myself through their voices. When it was my turn, I stood, took a slow breath. My name is Allison Monroe. I studied this field before, but I left to care for a family member. Now I'm back. Not for anyone else, just because it's time for me. The room fell silent. No one asked anything more. But I saw it in the eyes of a few women near me, something clear, not pity, but recognition. As I left, Diane was waiting by the door to see the students out. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to share the details of your past," she said softly, "but you'll find many here understand more than you think." I nodded. On the way home, I stopped at the bookstore near campus. I picked a book titled Listening Between Silences. The cover showed a wooden chair standing in a field. I didn't buy it for the title, but because the quiet on that cover felt like a reflection of a piece of me. At home, I opened my notebook and wrote another page. I once lived in the endless noise of expectations, criticisms, and demands. Now, I choose the quiet of what is kind and genuine. If anyone asks where I began again, I will say, from the moment I stopped asking permission to be myself. I closed the notebook, looked out the window. A breeze passed over the sill. A small lavender flower swayed gently in the light. No one called, no one intruded. It was just me and the new life unfolding, little by little. About 3 weeks after I settled into Denver, a message from Casey popped up one evening while I was studying in a small cafe near campus. The screen lit with a short line. "She's telling everyone, you're in rehab." I set my cup of tea down, looking out through the glass pane. The air outside had grown colder, condensation fogging the streetlights beyond. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't angry. Everything was happening just as I had expected. I didn't reply, but I saved that message. A puzzle piece in the picture my mother was trying to paint of me, a twisted canvas, soaked in her self-written script of tragedy. That night, I reopened the files I had stored since the beginning. From the Livestream video Casey had sent, to invoices, correspondence with doctors and lawyers, to the email I sent ending my financial guardianship. I placed them all in a separate encrypted folder, backed up to 3 different platforms. I had no plan to make them public, but I refused to be left defenseless if the truth were twisted. Among the old messages I had saved, there was a short note from Aunt Gloria. If Allison really needed help, why would she disappear like that? No one leaves home over something so small. I reread it over and over. Something so small? 5 years of sacrifice, losing an entire life path, then being smeared in front of relatives, reduced to small? I turned off the screen, closed my laptop, and stepped out of the cafe. Outside, the air was sharp against my face. I pulled my collar higher, shoved my hands into my coat pockets, and walked slowly toward the apartment. A few kids were playing in the courtyard, their laughter echoing into the night. For a moment, I felt a quiet release. At my door, I paused, looking at my reflection in the glass. My eyes were clearer, steadier than the hollow face I used to see in Chicago. No matter who knew how I was living, I was still whole. The next day, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject line, "Concerned cousin reaching out." When I opened it, I saw the sender's name, Thomas Monroe, a distant cousin who had gone to school with Jessica. The email read, "Aunt Carol told me you've been struggling with serious mental health issues and are in residential treatment. I'm really worried. Are you okay? Do you need support? No matter where you are, we care. Please reply." I sat still before the screen. Thomas had never been close to me, but at least he was level-headed enough to ask instead of accuse. I didn't reply, but I created a folder labeled Witnesses. His email was the first I saved there. I began to realize my mother wasn't just spreading lies out of anger. She was building another narrative, another version of me to protect herself. She couldn't admit that I had left because I couldn't endure anymore. Instead, she wanted others to believe I was weak, broken, in need of saving. That same afternoon, Casey called on video. Her face filled the screen, standing outside with the familiar parking lot of our old grocery store behind her. "Are you okay?" Casey asked as soon as I picked up. "I just wanted to tell you, she's lying everywhere. She's saying, you're depressed from work stress, lost control, and cut everyone off. Some people are even raising money to help you recover." I raised my eyebrows slightly. Raising money? Yeah. Some actually believe it. Aunt Gloria even wrote a post calling the family to support you through a tough time. "You don't need to say more," I replied calmly. "I'm not surprised. I'm just relieved I'm not there to see it." Casey pressed her lips together. "I've saved the posts and the private family chat messages. I'll send them to your personal email. No one else will know." "Thank you. Would you be upset if I still stayed in touch with them? I mean, I want to observe, keep records, but I don't want you to think I'm betraying you." "I understand," I smiled. "You're doing the right thing. I don't need you to take sides. I just hope you keep your fairness inside." Before ending the call, Casey moved the screen closer so I could make her face better. "You look a lot healthier now," she said. "Your eyes are brighter, your voice steadier." "I'm glad." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her for a moment, then said, "I still have to relearn how to breathe. But this time, I breathe for myself." After ending the call, I went back to my desk, opened a page on acceptance and commitment therapy. In the practice guide, there was a passage I had highlighted. "Endurance does not create courage. It is the choice of freedom that paves the way for bravery to appear." I underlined it again with a blue pen, then wrote a short note in the margin. "I'm not running away. I'm only choosing a life where I don't have to act." That night, I sat at my desk until late. Not to work on assignments, not to scroll through old messages. I simply wrote small fragments of memory, conversations in my head that had never been spoken aloud, feelings compressed for years, now flowing line by line, word by word, without arrangement. I wasn't writing for anyone to read. I was clearing a path for myself out of a story others had tried to write on my behalf. And with each word I put down, I was taking back steps toward the life I had lost in unseen sacrifice. I never imagined the quiet new life I was building in this mountain city would one day be mentioned at a national conference. The day I was invited to be the keynote speaker for the post-pandemic applied psychology conference, I sat for hours staring at the email, skepticism simmering inside me. The letter said, "We believe your journey of recovery, both personal and professional, will give strength to hundreds who are trying to find themselves again after loss." I hesitated, not from lack of confidence, but because I understood standing in that light meant more than telling a story. It meant opening doors I had worked so hard to close. But then I thought of my earliest patient conversations, of the wounded eyes of women, learning to forgive others by forgiving themselves. I thought of the journal entries I had written, pages soaked in tears, but also in resilience, and I nodded. The conference hall was in Austin, Texas. A large but warm space, wooden seats arranged around a round stage. Each seat had a printed bio of the speakers, and I felt a lump in my throat when I saw my name printed clearly. Dr. Allison Monroe, M.A., LCP. I walked onto the stage to the sound of applause from hundreds of people watching. The lights weren't blinding, but bright enough that I couldn't make out faces, only a sea of eyes waiting for me to begin. I stood still for a moment. No script, no slides. Just me, a microphone, and a story that had lived inside my chest for years. "Several years ago," I began, voice steady, "I was a 31-year-old woman living in a city where everyone thought I was successful. I had a steady career in real estate, a tidy apartment, and a savings account safe enough to be called secure." I paused. But no one knew that each month I woke at 3 a.m. to call the insurance company, begging to extend medical bills. No one knew I dropped out of psychology school only 6 months from graduation because of a call from the hospital saying my mother had a stroke. A ripple of murmurs swept across the hall. No one knew I sold my first car, the one I bought with my own salary, just to pay hospital fees. And no one knew that for 5 years I lived without a single day I could call my own. I saw some people nod, some sat straighter, some lowered their heads, hands clasped tight. I'm not telling this for pity, I said slowly. I'm saying it so that if anyone here has ever felt like the only one carrying something too heavy, you are not alone. I spoke about the night my mother called me a failure at family dinner, unaware she was being live-streamed. I spoke about nights in my rented apartment in Denver, typing enrollment applications with trembling hands, unsure if I deserved another chance. I didn't start with therapy. I hadn't reached it yet. I wrote. I walked. I spoke to my first patients with the very words I once wished someone had spoken to me. I don't remember how long I spoke, but when I finished, the whole hall stood in applause. A gray-haired man, likely a psychiatrist, shook my hand, his eyes wet. A young pregnant woman hugged me tightly and whispered, "You just saved me with your story." That night, back at the hotel, I opened my laptop to check work emails. Instead, my inbox overflowed. Notes from old colleagues in Chicago, from former students in tutoring sessions, and at the bottom, a subject line I read twice. The therapist who treated herself first. It was the title of an article from a well-known medical journal, quoting my talk. They even cited lines I never thought anyone would remember. The comments section was overflowing. Readers wrote that they saw themselves in every line. A woman in Florida wrote, "I never admitted I was burned out from caring for my mother-in-law. Today, I said it aloud. I read each word, heavy and light at once. Some wounds, if you dare expose them not for attention, but for healing no longer fester in the dark." A week later, the article was reprinted in a local paper in Indiana. Just a small column, but with my portrait, standing at the podium, eyes looking out as if reaching something deeply personal. The paper was shared in a community group on Facebook, the same group once filled with false rumors about me 2 years earlier. Casey texted only 2 words. They saw. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't need to. My photo, with the caption, "She didn't disappear. She came back where she belonged." I saved it, not to boast, but as a reminder that what was twisted, with enough patience, finds its way back to truth. I didn't recognize her at first. My next conference was in Boulder, in a modest but elegant center. The space was warm, linen-covered chairs, still life oil paintings on the walls. I was backstage preparing for an afternoon panel when a staff member came close, whispering, "There's a woman at the front desk who says she's your mother. She insists on seeing you." I froze, still holding a half-printed packet. My heartbeat didn't race. I didn't panic, only silence filled my chest. A strange, steady silence. "Should I refuse her, ma'am?" The receptionist asked again, seeing my pause. I lifted my head, voice calm. "No. Let her in." She appeared soon after, carrying a cloth bag, walking with a faint limp, still wearing that old dark brown dress, the patterned shawl she used at family gatherings. Her face bare of makeup, hair brushed neat, but the hollowness at her eyes unmistakable. I said nothing. I didn't step closer. She stood in the hallway, about 12 feet away. Her eyes locked on me, her shoulders trembling. "Allison," her voice was hoarse. I need to talk to you." I didn't respond. I turned, walked slowly into the main hall. She followed. And only when I reached the edge of the stage, where the projection system for the closing presentation was already set up, did I stop and face her. Some in the audience noticed something was happening. A stir in the air. A few heads turned our way. I didn't mind. "I've spoken to many people," I said clearly, not loud, not sharp, but enough for those nearby to hear. People hurt by family they couldn't confront. And today, it seems I'll practice that here. She took a step closer. "I didn't come to blame you. I just want to hear you speak. One word. Even if it's anger, even if it's hatred. I just want you to look at me like before." I pressed my lips together. The lump didn't rise, only a heavy dullness deep in my throat. "I've been looking at you for a long time," I answered, "but you've never looked back." "It was just a misunderstanding," she rushed. I don't remember exactly what I said. Everyone was laughing. I just slipped. Some in the audience stopped taking notes. The space seemed to shrink. I inhaled. You don't remember? Or you didn't think I would hear? Her eyes blurred with tears. I never meant to hurt you. Then when you called me a failure in a cheap suit, what was that? My voice stayed level. The words left me like breath, but made her bow her head. The room thickened. No one expected that sentence in the middle of a medical conference. At the edge of the stage, I saw Casey, my cousin, standing by the curtain. Her face tense, but when I glanced at her, she gave a small nod. I turned to the technician by the projector. Play the file labeled Cast July 20 for me. He hesitated briefly, then complied. Seconds later, my mother's voice rang out through the hall. The unmistakable sound. A clink of glass, a burst of laughter from older women. And then, clearly, Allison is nothing but a burden, a failure in a cheap suit pretending to be successful. Whispers rippled. I didn't turn. I kept my eyes on the woman in front of me, the face I had pictured thousands of nights in Denver, still wanting to believe she hadn't meant it. She said nothing. Eyes wide, lips moving without sound. Casey stepped forward, handed me the USB with the original video, then faced her. I'm sorry, but this has to be clear. No one should drown in lies just because someone cries. My mother stepped back, her face pale. You showed that video to the whole hall? She asked, voice faltering. I shook my head. Not to shame you, to show you how I lived after those words, to make you see that what you thought was a joke killed the last decent part of me. She broke into tears, lines of age deepened by sorrow. I sacrificed my life for you. I never abandoned you. But you denied me, I whispered. The moment you put laughter above truth. The moment you spoke those words without a thought of the cost. She sank into the front row, silent. I returned to the stage, adjusted the mic. We often think those who hurt us must be enemies. But sometimes, it's the very person who first tied our shoelaces, spelled our name, taught us love. Today, I'm not telling a story for sympathy. I'm saying this. Silence does not heal pain. Only when we face it do we have a chance to heal. No one spoke. Then applause broke out. Not loud, not rushed. Steady, genuine. As if each person in the hall was quietly nodding, giving themselves a moment to reflect on relationships they could not yet name. Mornings in Denver always carried a different light. Softer, warm enough to ease the heart, but cool enough to keep it clear. I sat by the wide window looking out at the garden behind the building where I lived and worked, a cup of ginger tea in hand. Inside, my new office still carried the faint smell of wood, varnish, and fresh paper, a mix that grounded me like an embrace from the place itself. I set the cup down, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled from the bottom drawer an envelope I had prepared days before. I wrote it by hand, careful strokes, as if giving away something final. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's letting go. I have. No name, no address. I left it in the drawer of my desk beside my framed master's degree and a crystal award etched. Outstanding contribution to trauma recovery. All placed where anyone could see, but no one needed to ask. They weren't for display. They were markers of the ground I had crossed. The next room was the counseling center I opened free of charge for those who had once been caregivers like me. They came, each with a story, each with pain, but all with the same wound, forgetting themselves while caring for others. Women with silvered hair, 10 years spent nursing paralyzed husbands. A single father raising an autistic child to exhaustion. A young woman in her 20s who left college to care for her mother with late-stage cancer. I listened to them all. No judgment, no interruption. I wasn't their healer. I was their companion. They didn't know the details of my past. They didn't need to. But whenever they sat across from me, eyes wet yet forcing a smile, I saw myself in them, a worn-out copy still trying to stand. Every Friday afternoon, I held an open talk. No registration. Anyone could come, sip hot tea, share, or just listen. Some days, Only 3 came. Sometimes the room was full. But no matter the size, I always began with one question. Have you given yourself 5 minutes lately, just to think of yourself? They usually laughed or lowered their heads. Soon after, the tears came. I didn't try to teach them anything. I only spoke honestly about my journey. Without gloss, without trimming. I spoke of nights with my head over the sink, too tired to cry. Days I wanted to turn off my phone, vanish. Mornings I couldn't tell if I was living or just existing. I spoke of the letter I never sent, of words I wished to hear from my mother but never would. And I spoke of one very small moment, the moment I sat in class in Denver, pen in hand, writing my first paper. After returning, my hand shook, but I wrote one line. And that line was enough to know I could begin again. One evening, as a session ended, a woman named Martha came to me. She was my mother's age, hair nearly white, her face lined deep from cheek to chin. You know, she said, softly but firmly, today was the first time in 8 years I said my name without adding my husband's. I said, I'm Martha, and I'm tired. I looked at her. And you're allowed to be tired. She held my hand, eyes wet. You reminded me that I'm still here. I gently squeezed her hand, saying nothing more. That evening, when I returned to the apartment behind the center, I opened the kitchen door, switched on the soft yellow light, and cooked myself a simple meal. On the table was a bowl of vegetable soup and a slice of toasted bread. I ate slowly, listening to the evening radio playing soft jazz. No one asked where I had gone or if I had come back yet. No one demanded I pay bills or take my mother to a doctor the next morning. No one needed me to be a stand-in anymore. I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head toward the ceiling. This space wasn't big, but it was mine. No permission needed, no proof required. The next day, I returned to my morning class at the university, where I was leading a practicum group for senior students. As I entered, a student named Kyle raised his hand. Miss Allison, last time you talked about the boundary between caring for others and protecting yourself. But what if the person you love most is the one draining you? The room went silent. I looked at him and gave a small nod. You don't have to abandon love to keep yourself, but you do have to learn how to set boundaries. Not out of selfishness, but because if you collapse, you'll have nothing left to give. Kyle wrote quietly while I walked to the board and wrote one line. No one can care for others fully if they abandon themselves. When I turned back, the whole class was still deep in thought, yet I didn't feel heavy. I felt light, as if those words weren't just for them, but for me, past, present, and tomorrow. What do you think if someone once rejected by her own mother could become the one listening to the pain of strangers? Have you ever wondered if forgiveness must always mean going back? Or could it sometimes mean choosing to move forward, gently closing a chapter that weighed too much? I don't have the right answer for everyone, only what I've lived. But if you've ever been the child who bore too much for family, who gave until you lost yourself, then maybe we share more than you think. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to listen, not as a storyteller, but as someone who once sat on the other side of the screen, quietly searching for a voice of understanding in this wide world. And if you want to keep following real stories, deep, emotional, about family ties, wounds, release, and quiet rebirths, subscribe to the channel. Because in each of these stories, you might just see a part of yourself,